From crowded supermarkets in New York to farmers markets in Texas, American consumers are facing something unusual: empty shelves and soaring food prices. But this is not due to drought, natural disaster, or pandemic. Instead, the source of disruption lies just across the northern border. Canada, long considered America's closest agricultural partner, has imposed sweeping export restrictions on essential products such as milk, beef, wheat, and fertilizer. The result has been an immediate strain on the United States food system, exposing just how fragile the trade relationship between the two countries has become. What was once a stable, cooperative partnership has now shifted into a tense standoff. Some experts even warn of a looming economic Cold War. For decades, the United States and Canada have shared one of the most reliable economic relationships in the world. Their 8,800-kilometer border is the backbone of hundreds of billions of dollars in trade every year, with agriculture playing a central role. Canadian dairy, beef, wheat, seafood, and fertilizer have long been staples in American households. But since the start of 2025, Ottawa has changed course dramatically. New protectionist policies restrict exports, impose fresh tariffs, and tighten transport licensing. Canada's official explanation: protecting domestic food security in the face of climate stress, crop failures, and labor shortages. Yet analysts in Washington argue there's more at play. They see Ottawa's move as a strategic response to recent United States policies on energy and climate regulation that have squeezed Canada's oil and gas industry. Whatever the reason, the consequences have been swift and severe. The northern states were the first to feel the shock. Supermarkets in Michigan, Minnesota, and New England reported drastic drops in Canadian imports almost overnight. Soon, shortages spread across the country. Canada is a major supplier of milk, butter, and cheese to the United States. With restrictions in place, retail chains reported up to a 60% decline in dairy imports. Milk prices rose 25% in just 4 weeks, while small artisanal cheese producers in Wisconsin were forced to close due to skyrocketing input costs. Canadian seafood: lobster from Nova Scotia, salmon from Newfoundland, crab from Labrador, vanished from United States restaurants. High-end eateries in Boston and New York dropped signature dishes, while chains like Red Lobster struggled to cope with doubled wholesale prices. The effect rippled through the hospitality sector, cutting hours for chefs, servers, and suppliers. Canada has long been one of the world's top producers of durum wheat, that essential grain behind pasta, bread, and so many processed foods that fill American shelves. When Canadian supplies were cut back, the impact on the United States was immediate and dramatic. Import prices for wheat surged by more than 40%, sending shockwaves through bakeries, food processors, and retailers nationwide. For consumers, the effects were clear at checkout. Pasta prices climbed by roughly 30%, while bread rose by about 25%. Supermarket chains, struggling to stretch dwindling supplies, began rationing flour in some regions. This was more than just a supply issue. It was a cost-of-living crisis. Low-income families, who rely heavily on affordable staples like bread and pasta, bore the brunt of rising prices, forcing some really difficult choices at the dinner table. The disruption highlighted just how dependent the United States has become on cross-border wheat supplies, and how quickly a trade dispute can ripple into everyday meals. The crisis extended beyond food shelves to the fields themselves. Canada is the world's leading exporter of potash, a critical fertilizer that underpins global agriculture. With Canadian supplies squeezed, United States farmers faced a double blow: higher costs and limited alternatives. Many turned to sources in South America or the Middle East, but prices there were up to 40% higher. The financial strain was immediate. Farmers in Iowa and Illinois warned that unless the situation improved, they would be forced to cut planting acreage. Early projections suggested declines of 15 to 20% in soybean, corn, and vegetable yields by the end of 2025. That kind of reduction would not only push domestic food prices higher, but also undermine America's role in global grain markets. For farmers and consumers alike, fertilizer shortages became a stark reminder that agriculture doesn't just depend on seeds and soil. It depends on international supply chains that can shift overnight. By the end of the first quarter of 2025, the United States Department of Agriculture recorded a 12.4% increase in average food prices, the highest since the 1980s. Households adjusted quickly. About 63% reported buying less fresh meat, 42% switched to canned or frozen alternatives, and families prioritized affordability over nutrition, raising concerns about long-term health impacts. Supermarket giants like Walmart and Kroger turned to imports from Europe and Latin America, but global shipping costs, driven up by oil prices and container shortages, kept prices high. Meanwhile, restaurant chains from McDonald's to Chipotle were forced to shrink menus, raise prices, or even close some outlets. The United States food processing sector, heavily dependent on Canadian raw materials, found itself in crisis. Smaller businesses without financial reserves teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. International observers see Canada's actions as more than just simple protectionism. By cutting off agricultural exports, a sector where the United States is, heavily dependent, Canada is applying leverage in ongoing trade disputes. Throughout 2024, Washington introduced stricter climate and energy rules that directly impacted Canada's oil sands industry, which is really a cornerstone of its economy. Restricting agriculture exports might be Ottawa's way of pushing back, quietly but honestly, pretty effectively. Canada denies this interpretation, insisting its policies are purely about protecting its citizens' food supply. Yet, the timing and scope of the measures, coming during peak harvest season and affecting nearly all key products, well, they make Washington skeptical. The crisis is raising some tough questions about the future of North American trade. What happens when food security, the most basic of needs, becomes sort of a bargaining chip? For American consumers, the impact is already clear. Higher grocery bills, fewer options, and growing uncertainty about the stability of everyday supplies. For farmers and food producers, rising fertilizer costs and disrupted supply chains really threaten livelihoods. For policymakers, the situation is even more sobering. It highlights the vulnerabilities of interdependence. When two economies are so tightly linked, a single decision in Ottawa can shake dinner tables across the United States. Some lawmakers are even describing the situation as a form of economic Cold War, not fought with tanks or missiles but with tariffs, soybeans, and wheat. The United States is exploring alternatives, from negotiating with Canada to expanding imports from other regions. But honestly, diversifying food supply chains is no simple task. Establishing new trade routes takes time, infrastructure, and of course, political will. Meanwhile, American families continue to feel the pressure at the checkout counter. Economists warn that if shortages persist, long-term changes in diets, supply chains, and even farming practices may follow. Consumers may end up eating less fresh food, restaurants might rely more on imports, and United States farmers could face years of volatility. The United States-Canada food dispute is more than just a temporary trade squabble. It's really a stress test for globalization itself. It shows how quickly even close allies can shift from cooperation to confrontation when domestic pressures rise. It also underscores a deeper truth. In a world of climate change, resource scarcity, and shifting politics, food security is becoming one of the most powerful tools of influence. For now, the shelves in American supermarkets tell the story best. When trust between partners breaks down, it's ordinary families who pay the price. The bigger question remains, will the United States and Canada find a path back to cooperation, or is this just the beginning of a new era where food, like oil and technology, becomes a weapon of economic competition?